You take a seed, you plant it, you grow it, you dry it, you roll it, you smoke it, and it goes down smooth. Hey!
Spanning the globe to bring you the latest developments in medical cannabis, adult marijuana, industrial hemp, and spiritual ganja. It's time for the Marijuana Agenda with Russ Belville. Now, here's your host, Russ Belville.
Good day, tokers and tokettes and non-toking lovers of liberty. It is Friday, June 23rd, 2017, and it's got to be 420 somewhere in the world. We made it to the weekend, folks, and what a beautiful weekend it is. Forecast temperatures up into the hundreds here in Portland, Oregon, and I heard they're getting into like the 117s up to the 120s down in Nevada and in Phoenix, Arizona area. Woo, it is hot out there, but it's cool in here where we're talking about marijuana legalization. And on today's program, we have the drug policy reform update. We've got New York's Crystal D. Peoples-Stokes. She's a Democratic Assembly member of the New York Assembly. Also, we've got New York Policy Coordinator for the Drug Policy Alliance, Christopher Alexander, who's got a great piece up on the Drug Policy Alliance blog today about the killing of Philando Castile being justified by the smell of marijuana. We'll bring that to you in hour 2 as well. Also, big thanks to Wayne Reese, our activist correspondent, for bringing that to us from the CWCBE in New York City. In drug war data mining, we got 2 studies on car crashes that are saying something somewhat conflicting. In government at work, we speak with Nevada State Senator Segerblom on the July 1st adult use opening date. And in the Radical Rant, I explain how legalization without pot shops, cannabis cafes, and home grows is just entrapment. The news is next, right after this.
You're listening to the Marijuana Agenda with Russ Belville.
Looking for the 420 friendliest way to visit beautiful legal Potland, Oregon?
I'm Lori Duckworth, inviting you to come stay with us at Delta 9 House and Studios.
You get your own private room with queen bed and access to our high-speed Wi-Fi, premium entertainment system, and more.
We'll even cook you breakfast. Look us up on Facebook at Delta 9 House.
That's facebook.com/Delta9House. Delta 9 House is booked through Airbnb.com. City of Portland permit number 17-159855. And now, in the interest of fair and balanced journalism, the Marijuana Agenda presents this anti-drug public service announcement.
McGruff here. If someone asks you to try drugs, think of me and say what I'd say. And to help you, have one of these masks.
Wow, thanks, McGruff.
Now, what are you going to say if someone asks you to try drugs?
My mom and dad told me not to, and I wouldn't lie to them.
Sensational.
Don't use drugs. Don't use drugs.
Here's how you can get a free mask. And on the back are more ways to say no and help me take a bite out of crime.
To combat this sort of reefer madness, listen to the Marijuana Agenda every weekday at mjagenda.com.
You're listening to the Marijuana Agenda with Russ Belville.
Hi, I'm Russ Belville from the Marijuana Agenda. Putting together the most comprehensive live weekday marijuana news talk program is a full-time job. Now you can do your part to ensure that listener-supported independent cannabis radio journalism can continue by becoming a patron of the Marijuana Agenda. Just log on to mjagenda.com and click the Become a Patron button. For your $4.20 monthly donation, you'll receive over 20 hours of original first-hour podcasts, plus other materials only available to paid subscribers. Or for just $9.99 a month, become a VIP patron. You'll get over 40 hours of podcasts for the complete program, including Toker Talk Radio, plus ad-free downloads of the segments heard on the Marijuana Agenda. Plus, VIPs get exclusive access to the video replay of the 2-hour live stream show and downloads of the spreadsheets and charts I provide from my years of curating marijuana data sets. Thank you for your support, and remember, I cannot do it without you. Please become a patron today at mjagenda.com.
This is your Cannabis Headline News. Brought to you by MarijuanaMoment.net, the complete source for all your marijuana news in one morning newsletter from Marijuana Majority founder Tom Angel. Subscribe today for free at marijuanamoment.net.
This is your Cannabis Headline News for Friday, June 23rd, 2017. I'm Russ Belville. In two speeches, Vice President Mike Pence continued talking about a ramped-up drug war. In remarks by Vice President Pence at the National Summit on Crime Reduction and Public Safety, he said, quote, "At the President's direction, the Department of Justice will no longer let the worst offenders off easy. We're once again pursuing the most serious, readily available, provable charges for drug traffickers and violent criminals. This is about stopping drugs from entering our schools so that our children can shape their future," end quote. In remarks by Vice President Pence at the Wilson Center, he said, quote, "The President has already taken decisive action to protect the American people from the harshest consequences of illegal immigration and the transnational drug trade. At the President's direction, American law enforcement is targeting gangs and criminals like never before," end quote. Mainstream media outlets, including the Washington Post and Huffington Post, are reporting that a strong majority of Americans say individual states should be able to enact their own laws on marijuana without interference from the federal government. 76% of American adults want President Donald Trump to respect state marijuana laws, according to a new poll published Thursday from Survey USA, commissioned by the drug policy reform group Marijuana Majority. Majorities of Republicans, Democrats, Independents, and respondents of every age group agreed that the feds should not interfere with state marijuana laws. It's the strongest support to date for such laws, 3 points higher than an April survey from Quinnipiac University asking a similar question. The poll also found that more Americans support rather than oppose the consumption of marijuana by professional athletes, 46%, journalists, 50%, and gun owners, 48%, if those individuals live in a state where it is legal for them to do so without punishment. Hawaii Governor David Ige signed a bill adding new medical cannabis qualifying conditions and amending other regulations. Under the new law, patients suffering from rheumatoid arthritis, lupus, epilepsy, and multiple sclerosis will now qualify for medical cannabis. Also, the new law increases the number of marijuana plants that a qualified patient and primary caregiver may jointly possess from 7 to 10 plants at any stage of growth, permits qualified patients and primary caregivers to access laboratory testing for their medical marijuana, allows the Department of Health to permit additional retail dispensing location and cultivation of additional plants for dispensary licensees, and allowing providers of paratransit or other assistive services to have limited access to dispensaries while providing assistance to a qualifying patient. MassLive.com reports that the Massachusetts Senate passed its marijuana bill on Thursday, a revised version that sticks closer to the original provisions laid out in the referendum voters supported last November. Compared to the House bill passed on Wednesday, the Senate's version makes less severe changes, specifically to the rate at which marijuana would be taxed. The senators voted 30-5 in favor of the bill, which keeps an original 12% tax rate that would vary by local communities. The House's version of revised pot legislation repealed what voters approved of last fall, taxing the legal substance at a total of 28%. Legalization advocates said the high tax rate would keep the black market of marijuana sales thriving. The legislation also includes an amendment which erases past marijuana possession records. The Senate bill requires town referendums in order to build marijuana shops and facilities. That requirement is yet another contrast to the House legislation, which removed the will of towns to vote on individual marijuana bans in their municipalities. KSNV3 News Las Vegas has obtained a copy of Nevada's State of Department of Emergency and draft regulations to allow certain medical marijuana establishments begin selling recreationally to adults 21 and older beginning July 1st. The regulations detail limitations on the amount of THC in edibles and set requirements for child-proof packaging and labeling, and ban certain products normally found appealing to children, such as lollipops or gummy bears. This has been your Cannabis Headline News for Friday, June 23rd, 2017. I'm Russ Belville.
You're listening to the Marijuana Agenda with Russ Belville.
If you work in the cannabis industry, consume marijuana, or just support freedom, you need to know about breaking policy news that affects you. Marijuana Moment is the daily newsletter that helps you stay on top of all the latest and most important state, federal, and international cannabis developments. Brought to you by longtime legalization activist Tom Angel, Marijuana Moment puts a concise yet comprehensive overview of cannabis news in your inbox early every weekday morning. Wake up to Marijuana Moment and rest assured you'll be ready for the cannabis news that's driving the day. Subscribe now at marijuanamoment.net. I'm Russ Belville with the Marijuana Agenda. Join me every 4 weeks for Veterans of Compassion with the Veterans Cannabis Group. Learn more at mjagenda.com/about.
The Marijuana Agenda. Kevin Sabet's boogeyman since 2012.
You have offended my family, and you have offended Shaman Temple.
Yes, might have gotten away with it, too. If it wasn't for these blasted kids and their dogs.
At Herbie's Cannabis Seeds, we pride ourselves on bringing you the best quality seeds from the world's most respected cannabis seed producers, all at the lowest online prices. You can find Herbie's Seeds at herbiesheadshop.com. All cannabis seeds are sold as souvenirs and as a means of preserving cannabis genetics. Herbie's Seeds in no way intends to condone, promote, or incite the use of illegal or controlled substances. We strongly urge all prospective customers to check their national laws prior to placing an order. Herbie's Seeds at herbiesheadshop.com. Proud sponsors of the Marijuana Agenda with Russ Belville.
Activism begins with ACT. The Marijuana Agenda features the stories of hardworking grassroots activists working for an end to prohibition in today's activist agenda.
Welcome to the Drug Policy Reform Update. I'm Russ Belville. June 14th through 16th, the Cannabis World Congress and Business Expo was held at the Javits Center in New York City. Our own Wayne Reese was there and captured 2 interviews for us on today's podcast. We begin with Crystal Davis Peoples-Stokes, a Democratic member of the New York State Assembly, followed by Chris Alexander, the New York Policy Coordinator of the Drug Policy Alliance.
This is Wayne Reese, and I'm reporting for the Marijuana Agenda with Russ Belville, and I'm here with Ms. Peoples-Stokes, who is one of the first legislators up in Albany to support marijuana legalization, I should say regulation. And well, let's hand it over to Ms. Stokes, and maybe she can, Ms. Peoples-Stokes, and she can tell us a little bit about why she feels that this is an important step for New York State.
Well, for me, the most important reason to do this is to stop the mass incarceration of black and brown people for nonviolent crimes, that where you get sent to jail, learn how to be a criminal, and come out and never get an opportunity to participate in society again. Forces people to be in a place where they can't get jobs, can't go to college, can't earn an income to take care of their family, so they resort to where they started. And so I think we really do have to stop that mass incarceration. And the way to do it is not so much decriminalization, but it's to make it legal. To make it a legal product, tax it, regulate it, use some of the resources to reinvest in those communities that have been dismantled, and take the opportunity to create business and make sure that those businesses are diverse. They have to be made up of minorities and women. They have to have equal opportunity to have access to the business. And so I think based on those 2 strategies with the legalization of marijuana, we can turn communities around. One community at a time. We've already seen it be legal in other states. The wall didn't fall in, the sky didn't drop. The states are still operating. They're earning money that they use to invest in schools, invest in education, and we in New York could stand to use some of those resources as well.
That's fantastic. So clearly, we've had prohibition for about 100 years now, so there's an enormous amount of momentum, wind that is in your face and opposing you on this. And so I'm just going to throw you some of the criticisms that you're likely to get. So one of the criticisms is going to be, we already have decriminalization. And do you really want to encourage this kind of behavior? And isn't that going to hurt black communities?
No, I really wouldn't encourage that behavior. As a matter of fact, I wouldn't encourage anybody to smoke marijuana. But I will say this is that if you look at the data, the majority of the people in this country do smoke marijuana, and the majority of them are not black or brown, but they're the majority of people who get incarcerated for it. And so, you know, if you look at that information and look at it fairly, you should say you don't want the majority of the people who use marijuana locked up. They're white, you don't want them locked up, nor do we want black and brown people locked up. So let's just legalize it. We won't have to lock anybody up for it. And at the same time, we can gain resources that the government can use to then invest in those communities that have been disenfranchised.
And people like Kevin Sabet is going to respond to this, and he's going to say, well, what we're going to have is the same thing that we have with alcohol. They're going to set up your friend and mine, Jeff Sessions, is going to say, well, there's going to be a marijuana shop on every corner in black communities, and it's going to decimate black communities. So what do you say to that?
I'll say that there's a liquor store on just about every other corner. And even in very affluent communities, there's a liquor store. Some of them are larger supermarkets. That hasn't decimated it. And quite frankly, if you ask me, I would say alcohol is worse for you than marijuana, as well as cigarettes. There's a cigarette store on every corner as well. So I would say to Mr. Sessions that he should probably look for another job.
Thank you so much, Mr. Peoples-Stokes. You really have a lot of courage, and you're really on the right path. And we so appreciate your support.
You're very welcome. It's my pleasure to speak with you. Have a great day.
This is Wayne Reese with Marijuana Agenda with Russ Belville, and I'm here with Chris Alexander from Drug Policy Alliance. And Chris, you're the policy coordinator with Drug Policy Alliance. We all love Drug Policy Alliance, and so thank you, Chris, for let me just swing this around. Thank you for granting this interview. We appreciate it.
No, of course.
So maybe you can start off by telling us a full disclosure. We were both on a bus on Monday, heading up to Albany to lobby the legislature, and maybe for the state legislature, and maybe you can talk a little bit about what we were doing there.
Sure thing. We were up for a press conference about the reintroduction of the Marijuana Regulation and Taxation Act. That is the bill that would create the structure to regulate, to tax and regulate marijuana for adult use here in New York. And so the press conference symbolized both the reintroduction of the bill, but also the launching of the Start Smart New York campaign here in New York.
And so, in terms of policy, what have other states gotten correct with their tax and regulate bills? What have they done wrong?
Yeah.
And what fits for New York? New York has a lot of similarities with California. We both have big cities.
Yep.
Our populations are sort of similar. Even our culture is sort of similar. So what are some of the things that we're going to take, or that Drug Policy Alliance wants to take from other bills, and what are some of the things that doesn't fit well for New York? And so maybe you could talk a little bit about what's in the bill.
Absolutely. I think New York State is uniquely situated, as you said, with quite a unique and diverse landscape. The big city down here in New York, but quite a bit of land
upstate.
That could be used upstate, that could be used for growing and production. Some of the things that we've learned from other states that have been very helpful, as it gets a little louder here, some things have been helpful in other states. For example, California.
Of the cannabis industry.
It's getting louder.
Shark Tank.
For example, we'll wait for this guy to stop.
Starring Karen Cole and Ren Wynn.
We're doing it live, folks.
We're doing it.
We're doing it live. This is underground news. That's right.
For example, California was sure, contrary to some other states that have moved to legalization, to deal with some of the past records of people who've been previously convicted. That's one thing that this legislation does. It makes sure that people who've been previously convicted, that those offenses are either sealed or vacated or in some way reclassified, so that people are able to move forward with their lives. I think that's definitely a positive that has happened in other states. And then, we like the regulatory structure in Colorado, prohibiting vertical integration, allowing for small businesses to really be centered in the industry that comes out of this legislation. So I think those are two kind of pieces that are in this legislation that have been gleaned a bit from other states.
And what kind of traction are you getting with the legislators up in Albany? I mean, are people biting on this? Are you getting? What do you feel? You know, what's your sense on the ground?
Well, I mean, I'm the one in Albany every day. My team is up there quite often talking with these elected officials on this issue.
Right.
What we've seen is that people are quickly turning their stigma into curiosity, right? They're recognizing that the knowledge and the stories that they've been told about marijuana aren't always based in science or truth. They've also been paying closer attention to other states than we may think they've been, right? Watching what's happening in Washington State and in Colorado has definitely been something that we've learned that they have been watching. And I think in terms of the traction that we've been getting, there's momentum. The bill has been adding co-sponsors weekly on the Assembly side and on the Senate side, and we've had some great traction there. And
I know that Drug Policy Alliance is not only interested in marijuana regulation, but you've got you're more broadly based with drug regulations and drug policy in general. Yeah. So maybe you could talk about some other things that you're doing in New York State legislature or elsewhere in terms of other bills, other issues.
Sure, absolutely. We do work on all drugs. We are not just a marijuana-focused policy group. We spend time talking about heroin, talking about crack cocaine, talking about other substances that people use. And in addition to dealing with some of these novel substances like fentanyl that are coming up and K2 and those kind of challenges that the state is being faced with. One thing I would say, pieces of legislation that I think are particularly moving and are interesting to maybe to your viewers, a racial and ethnic impact statement legislation that requires the state legislature to consider the impact on different populations as they make moves to increase the incarcerated population of the state. So these types of legislations that get to not just the policy, legalization and decriminalization of drugs, but also the impact, right? Making legislators consider the impact before they pass legislation just trying to deal with an immediate response.
So are you saying that there are not necessarily specific bills, but that when bills come up, you want to lend your opinion or your perspective to in other words...
I'll speak more to it. This legislation would require the state...
Which legislation?
The legislation, the racial and ethnic impact statement legislation that I was discussing earlier would require the state to consider the impacts on different communities when they try to, pass legislation that will increase or create criminal penalties for, drug possession, for example. Right. And it would step outside of just drug offenses. It would touch a lot of different things as they create different criminal penalties. And so, a lot of the rhetoric now, as we've spent 40 years waging this war on drugs, has been that we didn't know this would be the consequence. We didn't know mass incarceration would be the consequence. And so this legislation would be one of those things that makes people look ahead at what the impact could be. And there's a lot of other things that we're working on too in terms of harm reduction and preventing overdoses and saving people's lives.
Great. So Chris, clearly you're very educated, you're very articulate. I don't know what your educational background is, but clearly you're, a very highly employable person, and yet you chose drug policy to go into, which clearly nobody goes into drug policy because they think, well, maybe I'll be a doctor, maybe I'll be an accountant, or there's always drug policy. Yeah. So why drug policy, Chris?
Well, I think, the intersectionality is always exciting. I like to lose. We lose a lot.
Well, you're in the right business.
Yeah. But no, we have a good time. We make sure that there are conversations that we have, that we bring up, that legislators aren't having, that people aren't having. People kind of segment populations of people that use drugs, people who are involved with drugs in some way. People are, inherently try to separate those conversations from the mainstream conversations that people are having on different, policy areas. Can I reword that part?
Go ahead.
Okay. Sorry. Oftentimes, drug policy is looked at as a fringe issue.
Right.
What we do is find the intersectionality, right? It's not just, we're talking about drugs, but we're not just talking about drugs. We're talking about child welfare. We're talking about housing policy. We're talking about the environment. We're talking about all these things when we're talking about drugs. And so, what is so exciting about working on drug policy is seeing that you can affect change in a lot of different areas. So that's what I meant to say the first time.
That is correct. You gave the correct answer.
Yeah.
So really, it's not drug policy. It's far beyond that. It's really about social justice and taking care of people. Really.
Absolutely.
Chris, it's a pleasure. Thank you so much for giving this interview.
Thank you so much.
That was Chris Alexander. Got to hold this. Chris Alexander with the Drug Policy Alliance. I'm Wayne Reese for Marijuana Agenda with Russ Belville. Thanks again, Chris.
Thank you.
This episode was produced as part of the Marijuana Agenda with Russ Belville, the daily news and interview podcast covering the world of medical cannabis, adult marijuana, industrial hemp, and spiritual ganja. MJAgenda.com.
New beginner guitars and banjos are often constructed much better than ones built before your time. Why struggle? Get a new instrument or fix the old one. The trusted professionals at the Fingerboard Extension will evaluate your instrument for free. Repairs are priced for people who work for a living. Stop by the Fingerboard Extension downtown Corvallis at 120 Northwest 2nd Street today, or check out its inventory on the web at fingerboardextension.com. And now, in the interest of fair and balanced journalism, the Marijuana Agenda presents this anti-drug public service announcement.
So, Sarah, what's going on here? Sarah? Sarah?
She won't answer you. Or she can't.
Why not?
This is the way it's been since she started smoking pot. She's all lazy and boring and... we used to have so much fun together.
And now?
This is what we do.
To combat this sort of reefer madness, listen to the Marijuana Agenda every weekday at mjagenda.com.
The Marijuana Agenda. Like the pharmaceutical agenda, without all the side effects, overdose deaths, insurance.
Side effects may include nausea, dry mouth, and constipation. Dry mouth, constipation, indigestion, and abdominal pain,
which can occur without warning and may cause death.
Hi, I'm Russ Belville from the Marijuana Agenda. Putting together the most comprehensive live weekday marijuana news talk program is a full-time job. Now you can do your part to ensure that listener-supported independent cannabis radio journalism can continue by becoming a patron of the Marijuana Agenda. Just log on to mjagenda.com and click the Become a Patron button. If you're an organization or business looking to promote your brand, we have sponsorship patronage available at mjagenda.com. Sponsorship includes 15 and 30-second ad breaks and 6-minute interviews on the podcast, depending on sponsorship level, which begins at $19.99 a month. Thank you for your support, and remember, I cannot do it without you. Please become a patron today at mjagenda.com.
Promoting the end of adult cannabis prohibition is easy because we have facts, science, reason, compassion, evidence, truth, and logic on our side. It's even easier when researchers catalog it all for us. Learn how to gather the facts on marijuana use, arrests, seizures, rehabs, drug tests, and more on this edition of Drug War Data Mining.
Today in the Drug War Data Mines, we take a look at a pair of surveys that are out recently, a couple of studies, I should say, that are out recently that seem to be contradicting one another. The first one we mentioned on a previous episode of the show, been picked up by foxnews.com in their automobile section. And it goes, it mentions that a recent insurance study links car crash claims to legalized recreational marijuana. The Highway Loss Data Institute, a leading insurance research group, said in study results released Thursday that collision claims in Colorado, Washington, and Oregon went up 2.7% in the years since legal recreational marijuana sales began when compared with surrounding states. Legal recreational pot sales in Colorado began in January 2014, followed 6 months later in Washington, and in October 2015 in Oregon. Matt Moore, senior vice president with the Institute, which analyzes insurance data to observe emerging auto safety trends, said, quote, "We believe the data are saying, that crash risk has increased in these states, and those crash risks are associated with the legalization of marijuana," end quote. All right, so one thing to think about is that we're talking about an institute that is backed by the insurance industry. And the car insurance industry doesn't want to have to pay out its claims. The fewer claims that are made, the more money the insurance industry makes. So if they find a reason to believe that legalized marijuana is going to lead to more insurance claims, they want to oppose that sort of thing. However, if you think about what they've said in here, it's a study that I have to have a little bit of doubt about. And that would be in the specific wording where it says compared with surrounding states. All right, so what states surround Washington and Oregon? Those would be Idaho, Nevada, and California. Which states surround Colorado? Those would be Wyoming and Utah and where's my map? But the point would be states like Montana, Utah, Wyoming, Nevada, Idaho are very rural states with not a whole lot of large population centers as compared to places like Washington, Oregon, and Colorado that have the Denver and Portland and Seattle metropolitan areas, as well as a few other smaller metropolitan areas that are still pretty large compared to what you'd find in Idaho or Wyoming. So this sort of study, I don't put a lot of stock into this, that there'd be more crash claims, especially when we look at a study that was released just yesterday, published online in the Journal of the American Public Health Association. Crash fatality rates after recreational marijuana legalization in Washington and Colorado. Numerous PhDs and MDs working on this study. And I'm not sure where they're from. Let's see. Don't have their JV in front of me here. But anyway, the objectives of the study was to evaluate motor vehicle crash fatality rates in the first two states with recreational marijuana legalization and compare them with motor vehicle crash fatality rates in similar states without recreational marijuana legalization. They used U.S. Fatality Analysis Reporting System, FARS, to determine the annual numbers of motor vehicle crash fatalities between 2009 and 2015. So you legalized in 2012, you got 3 years before, 3 years after. In Washington, Colorado, and 8 control states. We compared year-over-year changes in motor vehicle crash fatality rates per billion vehicle miles traveled before and after recreational marijuana legalization with a difference in differences approach that controlled for underlying time trends and state-specific population, economic, and traffic characteristics. So not the states surrounding Washington and Colorado that might be Idaho or Wyoming with these small populations and little traffic, but similar types of states with large cities and large traffic situations. And what they found: pre-recreational marijuana legalization annual changes in motor vehicle crash fatality rates for Washington and Colorado were similar to those for the control states. Post-recreational marijuana legalization changes in motor vehicle crash fatality rates for Washington and Colorado also did not significantly differ from those for the controlled states. So the conclusion, 3 years after recreational marijuana legalization, changes in motor vehicle crash fatality rates for Washington and Colorado were not statistically different from those in similar states without recreational marijuana legalization. So Governor Phil Scott in Vermont, who vetoed an eminently sensible proposal in the state of Vermont to begin the process of marijuana legalization for the fear that there would be stoned mayhem on the freeway, you now have your science. You now have your science to show that this fear of the stoned mayhem on the freeway is unfounded. It's not happened in Washington and Colorado. And why would it happen in Vermont when Vermont has been in the top 5 for most marijuana use monthly? Like 14% of the people in Vermont are using marijuana monthly, and among the bottom 5 states as far as auto fatalities per 100 million miles driven. For years, this has been the case. Why would legalization make that any worse? People smoking pot now are the ones who are more reckless and want to break the law. After you legalize, the people smoking pot are the ones who followed the law. They didn't smoke until it was legal. Why would legalizing it make them more reckless behind the wheel? It makes no sense whatsoever. And there's more science on our side as well when you take a look at the recent studies, 2015, that have shown once you control for age and gender, there is statistically no difference in the crash risk, the odds ratio of a crash risk between someone who is found to have THC in their system versus a sober driver. It's time the stone mayhem on the freeway zombie lie was killed, was put out of its misery. The science is on our side. Never forget that.
You're listening to the Marijuana Agenda with Russ Belville.
Hey everybody, it's Russ Belville from the Marijuana Agenda, inviting you to be like me and get your ink done at Lucky Horseshoe Tattoo, Fort Worth's most female-friendly, clean, sterile, awesome tattoo shop. Thomas and his crew are true artists who can design you a custom piece or use a design you bring in. Lucky Horseshoe also offers all styles of tattooing as well as piercings and all-around fun. In the DFW area, stop by Lucky Horseshoe Tattoo and tell them Radical Russ sent you. Trust me, it'll feel awesome.
It's time for cannabis facts about teen drug use from Robert Platshorn's thesilvertour.org. This message is supported by our donors and Hemp Inc., a public company poised to lead America's hemp revolution at hempinc.com. A recent survey by the U.S. Centers for Disease Control indicates that in states that have legalized medical marijuana, the rate of marijuana consumption among high school students has not increased. In fact, in legal states like Colorado, teen use has actually decreased significantly. It's simply no longer a big deal for teenagers in legal states. This was Cannabis Facts from thesilvertour.org, an educational nonprofit supported by our donors and Hemp Inc., a public company poised to lead America's hemp revolution at hempinc.com.
You're listening to the Marijuana Agenda with Russ Belville.
I'm Russ Belville with the Marijuana Agenda. Join me every 2 weeks for Police for Reform with Law Enforcement Action Partnership. Learn more at mjagenda.com/about.
Marijuana has come a long way since President Richard Nixon signed the law declaring it a Schedule I drug. Since then, activists and lawmakers have been chipping away at prohibition at the state, local, and national level. Now, decriminalization, medical cannabis, and adult marijuana are realities throughout America. Join us as we learn more about how we're legalizing cannabis in this episode of Government at Work.
Good day and welcome to our Government at Work, our recurring segment where we speak to the lawmakers and regulators who are making a difference in the reform for marijuana laws across this country. Joining us today to discuss the situation happening in Nevada is State Senator Tick Segerblom. Tick, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So I was very excited to note that the state of Nevada was moving quickly on implementing rules to allow an early sales for adult use. Could you explain to our listeners a little bit about what's going on there to start those July 1st sales?
Yes, we're very proud of what we're doing. As you know, last November, the voters approved Question 2, which was adult use marijuana like Colorado, like Washington State. And under that law, it was to go into effect the 1st of January 2018. But unlike most other states around the country, we decided to actually implement it early. Our medical marijuana program is really modeled after a recreational program, so there really isn't much needed to be done to change it. So we just said we're just going to go ahead and convert the medical marijuana program into a recreational program too. And knock on wood, but looks like we're going to be able to start July the 1st, 6 months early, which is really unheard of in the country.
Was there any influence from the state of Oregon on this? Oregon also moved quickly on implementing its adult use sales by having a temporary program to allow sales through the dispensaries there. Was there any influence there?
Absolutely. We actually, after the election, we went up to Portland and talked to the people there to see how they did it and why they did it. And based upon that conversation, we realized that our program was actually much better off than their program. And the fact that they could do it meant that we could do it very easily. So that was definitely an impetus. But they still didn't get it done within 6 months. I mean, it's unheard of to go from medical to recreational in just 6 months, which again, knock on wood, we're hopefully going to be able to do.
One of the major differences between Oregon and Nevada's programs would have to do with the right of patients and adults to cultivate their own cannabis at home. In 2013, Nevada moved to restrict that cultivation right to anyone who lived within 25 miles of a dispensary, and that has been extended in the Question 2 to the recreational use shops. Could you explain a little bit about the politics behind that? Why is there that restriction on the home growing right?
We didn't really have that large of a home grow community, and the police were very adamant that to get their support for our medical program, which we adopted in 2013, they wanted to limit the home grows. And for better or worse, that's what we've done. At that time, we just said anyone who was home growing in 2013 could home grow until 2016. We extended that to 2018, and the law we just passed last week extends that permanently. So any of the existing home grows will be able to do it forever, but there won't be any new home grows that are within 25 miles of a dispensary.
There are concerns amongst people who are focused on patients in the medical marijuana communities whenever a state legalizes adult use. This started in Washington State, Oregon, Colorado. There's always been some concern that bringing along the adult use market will somehow impact the folks that are using cannabis medically. What is going on in the state of Nevada with regard to that, and how has the legislature reacted? How are they trying to implement, protect, or change the medical system there?
Well, what we learned from Oregon is that you really don't need to have two systems. You just need to have a different price structure. So what we've done is we've just taken our medical program, made it into a recreational program, but kept the discount basically for medical. So if you want to go into a dispensary, if you have a card, you pay 10% less than you would if you went in just because you're 21. That's as good as we could do right now. I suspect going into 2019 legislative session, we'll try to address the medical program differently. But for now, we felt the most important thing was to get it up and running, get it out there, because the sooner we can get it out there and the more we can get the state addicted to it, then there's not going to be any way to turn it back. And that's really what's happening.
I see. And so is it fair to say then the vision moving forward in Nevada is to have just one cannabis system, and the only difference for medical patients would be that price break that you mentioned?
Absolutely. And we may down the road tweak it a bit, but the fact is, as we saw in Oregon, there really is no point in having two separate counters like they have in Colorado, where you have two separate grows, and it makes really an inventory nightmare. So trying to keep the system simplified, and then make it all happen quickly, it just seemed like the best way to go was just have one combined system. If you want to grow a particular medical strain, that'll be sold in a dispensary, or you could just limit it to certain dispensaries. But the fact is that the medical patient would be able to go buy it, and would have to pay that excise tax. And then 10% may be not enough distinction. We may have to increase that distinction down the road, but we felt that to start with, 10% would be significant enough that people would want to keep their cards.
Senator, I'm also interested in some of the dynamics of the politics there in the state of Nevada, given that you've got some dynamics that other states don't have to deal with, namely a massive gaming industry there, and also the alcohol industry being somewhat tied to that. During the 2016 election, the most amount of money we saw raised against marijuana legalization came from one Sheldon Adelson there from the Sands Casino empire. Could you give us a little picture of how that's affecting the negotiations and the development of regulations there in the state of Nevada? Is the gaming industry a problem? Are they helping or hurting, or are they indifferent at this point?
I would say they're apprehensive and watching it very closely, because their licenses, their gaming licenses, are so tied to federal law. They're very reluctant to get directly involved, but they can see that this is a huge tourism attraction, and so they want to see how it evolves. They've been supportive in trying to have some type of a marijuana lounge system. We don't have it yet, but we're working on that. But I think it's kind of a wait and see. But if it really takes off, which I think it will, I think you're going to come back in 2 years and try to carve out a way where they can have a marijuana program tied to the casino property, maybe not owned by the same ownership, but in arenas or in bars and restaurants that are on the strip, but are not actually tied to a gaming license. But it's going to be interesting to see how it evolves. But they don't want people purchasing marijuana and going off the strip. They want that money to stay on the strip. So we'll just have to figure out how to make it happen.
Another unique aspect of Nevada's initiative that passed in 2016 was in how it handled the distribution of cannabis and bringing in the existing alcohol distributors into that model. How has their reaction been since legalization? Are they getting on board with this idea?
Well, that's another one of those wrinkles, the best intended, unintended consequences. So the big distributors, because again they're federally regulated, don't have anything to do with it. But there are a few smaller ones who said, yeah, we want to go ahead and do it. And the law that was passed by the voters, apparently, as I read it, says that they are supposed to have first dibs. The state has actually taken a different position and said that the few handful of distributors that want to do it couldn't possibly serve this industry, and so they're allowing other non-alcohol distributors to enter the process too. But there's actually, I don't know if you follow this, but there's a lawsuit pending and an injunction right now, which may throw a wrinkle in the opening on July the 1st. But we'll get there. It's just a question of whether this handful of liquor distributorships become the distributorships, or we create a whole new industry, and maybe some combination thereof. I mean, I think everyone wants to make sure that the program starts on July the 1st. People around the country, around the world, frankly, are ready to come to Vegas as soon as it happens. So we got to get this thing going.
Yeah, I think it'll be one spectacular 4th of July weekend, that's for sure. Senator, one final question on this edition of Our Government at Work. You mentioned the Las Vegas Strip earlier, and of course, tourism is a huge part of the economy in Nevada. And with that, the initiative in Nevada forbade public consumption of cannabis with the strongest penalties of any state that has passed such a law. I'm also curious about zoning and whether or not we'll be able to see actual cannabis sales on the strip, or is that going to be prevented?
Right now, it's not, sales are not allowed because there are no dispensaries on the strip. They're just a few blocks off the strip, but the county which regulates the strip would not allow them on the strip. But the real question is what you raise is, because we do have this public use law, how are people going to use it? You can't have 40 million people come here and encourage them to buy it and then say, oh, by the way, you can't use it anywhere. And you hate to have everybody just use edibles. So I was active in the legislature, and I'm active now, trying to come up with some type of an ordinance which would allow for lounges or clubs or streets or parks or concerts where you could use it, and it would just go to the definition of public. It would be public, as I interpret it, means that just walking up and down the street, whereas if it's some place where you have restricted access, that's really not public. So that's where we're going, but so far we aren't there yet. But I think you're going to see Nevada really take the lead on having places where people can go and legally use it. And that, to me, is going to be the biggest relief of all, for all people like myself who, have been using it or haven't used it but have used it, 40 or 50 years ago, to actually be able to sit somewhere out not in public, but outdoors or inside and use it and know that they are not breaking any law. They don't have to worry about anybody coming and busting them or their picture taken or anything else. That's going to be such a relief.
State Senator Tick Segerblom, thank you so much for joining us here on Government at Work. The adult use sales in the state of Nevada begin on July 1st. We're all looking very forward to that and the 4th of July weekend. Thanks again for joining us here on the show. We appreciate the work you've been doing on this issue.
Thank you.
This episode was produced as part of the Marijuana Agenda with Russ Belville, the daily news and interview podcast covering the world of medical cannabis, adult marijuana, industrial hemp, and spiritual ganja. MJAgenda.com.
The Marijuana Agenda with Russ Belville is proudly sponsored by the Marijuana Business Association. The MJBA, called by NBC News the Cannabis Chamber of Commerce, is the fastest-growing business association and the fastest-growing industry in America. I've been working with the MJBA for years, and I personally invite you to join the MJBA. MJBA also publishes the popular MJ Headline News on Facebook and the MJNewsNetwork.com and Marijuana Channel 1 on YouTube. Visit MJBA.net for more details. And now, in the interest of fair and balanced journalism, the Marijuana Agenda presents this anti-drug public service announcement.
And here comes Chris Hill, 4 feet 6 out of Jefferson Elementary, a confident young man with a great stride, but he might be in trouble now.
Hey, Chris. Want to get high? No way, man. That stuff's for losers.
Oh, what a move! Chris Hill never hesitates, just blows past that guy. Bob?
You're right, Mike. Look, Chris is known for his great head shake. Then he shifts his weight to the right foot, finds a hole, and zip, he's out of there.
Spectacular, just spectacular. This kid's got a bright future.
To combat this sort of reefer madness, listen to the Marijuana Agenda every weekday at MJAgenda.com.
The Marijuana Agenda, Kevin Sabet's boogeyman since 2012.
You have offended my family, and you have offended Shaman Temple.
Yes, might have gotten away with it, too. If it wasn't for these blasted kids and their dogs.
I'm Russ Belville with the Marijuana Agenda. Join me every 4 weeks for Cultivator's Corner with Jorge Cervantes from marijuanagrowing.com. Learn more at mjagenda.com/about.
Total war against public enemy number one.
10 federal criminal penalties for 1 ounce of marijuana.
Marijuana is probably the most dangerous drug.
Legalization is just another word for surrender.
I experimented with marijuana and didn't inhale.
This is not medicine. This is a Cheech and Chong show.
Encourage people to use less drugs.
I am here. That was the point.
I think it would be a mistake to legalize.
Negative reports coming out of Colorado.
Good people don't smoke marijuana.
Yeah, the rant, I want to take a look at the ways that marijuana legalization is still lacking. And in the 8 states that have passed legalization so far, and the District of Columbia, and including a few states that are looking at it pretty recently, New Jersey, Rhode Island, Vermont, there's one thing that's becoming clear to me, and that is that legalization is incomplete without pot shops, cannabis cafes, and home grows. And in fact, having legalization without those things is a form of entrapment. Because what good is a right? What good is it to give us a right if we have no way to exercise that right? If you're a person who doesn't own your own home, there are precious few places in the legal marijuana states where you can smoke marijuana. So you've gotten this right to use marijuana, but it's no good because you have no place that you can actually use it. That's a form of entrapment, if you ask me. It reminds me of Jack Palance in the old Western. Pick up the gun, son. You're just asking people to get busted for public consumption in some way. And when we see those people get busted for public consumption, they're not usually people that look like me. They're more likely to be young and more likely to be minority. The same thing goes for the lack of pot shops. There's a story out today that points out that pot dealing arrests, and this is from the U.S. News and World Report, that pot dealing arrests are back to pre-legalization levels in Washington, D.C. Arrests for distribution of marijuana in Washington, D.C. peaked in 2011 at about 340 distribution arrests. They plummeted to about 150 in 2012. Down to 2013, they were below 100. 2014, about 100. 2014, of course, when Washington, D.C. passed their initiative. 2015, they were down, but by 2016, rebounded. And by 2017, projected to be around 300 in Washington, D.C. Now, Washington, D.C. famously passed legalization that is called Grow and Give, where you're allowed to cultivate cannabis, you're allowed to possess cannabis, you're allowed to smoke cannabis, but nobody may buy or sell it. You are allowed to give it to each other. Wink. And we know how that's turning out. It's giving police yet another reason to bust people over cannabis. You give people this right, but not everybody has a green thumb and the ability to, or a place where they can grow cannabis. But they have a right and they want to exercise that right. We've entrapped them by not giving them a place to shop for it. So without a cannabis cafe, without a place to shop for it, we're once again putting people at risk. And again, who are these people in the D.C. area that are getting arrested more often? They're more likely to be people who are young and people who are minority. Now, possession with intent to distribute. Those arrests have gone down because now the mere possession of up to 2 ounces is not a problem, and those used to be called possession with intent to distribute. So there is a silver lining there. And if we legalize without home grow, this is the proposal going on in New Jersey and the proposal that passed in Washington State, where shops exist and you can possess, but you got nowhere to smoke it and you can't grow it yourself. This also entices people to break the law. Cannabis is something that people oftentimes want to have control over. They want to know where it comes from, how it was grown. They don't want to trust the state. They can't afford the taxes. By making home grow illegal, again, you incentivize people to break the law because they know how much more cheaply they can provide their own cannabis by growing it themselves than having to go to the store and pay the taxes and have to worry about how well that was tested, whether it was tested right, if the lab can be trusted, is there going to be a supply of the particular strain that I need? Was it grown in an organic fashion, in a veganic fashion? Some people are very picky about these things, and if you don't give them the right to grow for their own, they're just going to violate the law. And again, we've set people up to get busted. So legalization's a great thing. It's something we should always vote for. But until we have home grow, pot shops, and cannabis cafes, legalization is incomplete. That's all the time we have for Hour 1. Stay tuned for Toker Talk Radio coming up next live here on the Marijuana Agenda. And until next time, take care of each other, tokers.
Follow MJ Agenda on Facebook, Pinterest, Instagram, YouTube, and follow MJ Agenda Show on Twitter. Learn more at mjagenda.com.
You take a seed, you plant it, you grow it, you dry it, you roll it, you smoke it. You take a seed, you plant it, you grow it, you dry it, you roll it, you smoke it. You take a seed, you plant it, you grow it, you dry it, you roll it, you smoke it, and it goes down smooth.